Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. In today's episode, I had a conversation with Natasha Levinger, who is an intuitive reader, inner child healing teacher, and energy healer. We discussed Natasha's journey to finding this work, the difference between energy reading or energy healing and psychic work, the role of empowerment and imagination in her work, the relationship between creativity, perfectionism, and collaboration, and also some very nuanced discussions on love, light, and spiritual bypassing. It's a conversation with lots of full-bellied laughs, and listening back, I just love how Natasha's generous and kind energy really came through. And she's really funny too. Here's a bio that Natasha shared with the listeners of this podcast. Natasha grew up as a sensitive empath in a home where it was very challenging to be one. After she left home, she became impassioned to know herself well enough to decipher what was her information or her feelings and what was coming from her family programming and trauma or other people. After years of self-healing and education, ranging from a BA in human development to a variety of disciplines of energy healing, she decided to make it her life's work to help others. Using a mix of an energy reading and healing model that involves the chakra system and other modes of therapeutic models such as inner child healing and mindful self-compassion, she has helped hundreds of people to heal past trauma. She also has a passion for animals and loves helping people connect and communicate to their animals with her help. Through her practice, Highest Light Healing, she looks forward to helping even more people through classes, sessions with her, guided meditations, and more. Natasha lives in Asheville, North Carolina with her husband, 2 children, and currently 16 rescue animals. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Natasha Levinger. Welcome to the podcast, Natasha.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Thank you
Your
for
voice,
being here.
you should do like hypnotherapy or like meditations. Your
think
voice
so?
is I feel like you would have a real like soothing, like we're gonna drop into this voice.
Yeah. Thank you for that reflection. I was thinking about like how we got connected, and I feel like it was because of Britain, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think so. Yeah.
my teacher and collaborator and our mutual friend, Britton LaRue, kind of introduced us. And then I had a couple sessions with you, which were amazing and always so clarifying. And then I think you and Tess had me on your podcast. And then
Magic
I started
Monday.
taking, Magic Monday, which we'll talk about, in this episode for sure. And then I took your inner child healing and your energy healing 101 classes, right? So, I feel like I kind of know your work at this point.
Kind of. You know all of it. You really do. You're immersed.
So I'm super excited to talk with you today about all of the things. But I've been kind of starting these conversations with having people drop into who they feel, sense, or know themselves to be in the present moment. So if I offer that up, what comes up for you?
And you had, before we started recording, you said a couple things like that. And I was like, this is not a good question for someone with ADHD, because I'm like, overwhelmed with the vastness of that question. I mean, I would just say, like, who do I always know myself to be is a spirit in a body who's like just trying to be more of who I am, more of that spirit, that free, like releasing any patterning that's keeping me from being all of whoever that spirit wants to be. Does that sound like the most nebulous, vague answer? I
I
don't know.
love it, Natasha.
Okay, good.
I feel like just listening to that like makes me feel like, oh, there are all these strands that I'm releasing right now as we're speaking.
Oh, that's good. That's always good. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just always growing. And I mean, that's my goal in life. It always really, it has been since I was 15, actually. And like right now, I feel like I'm coming into, it's so funny. I'm kind of getting emotional and I don't cry easily, but I can feel myself. Like, I feel like I'm really coming into owning who I am and being that in the world in a way that I never have before.
Wow.
Because this last cycle of growth was really about owning that I can't, like, that I'm capable of doing what I want to do, that I am capable, I can do it, because I grew up being told literally the opposite. And so this last growth cycle really has been about, oh, I am accomplished and I can continue to accomplish what I want to put out in the world.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah. It feels good and expansive, and also a little, well, I was gonna say it feels scary, but that part doesn't feel scary. That part feels like centered and like, yeah, I can do this. This is why I'm here.
Yeah. I'm feeling like a Kelly Clarkson theme song coming through.
You can run it underneath
Yeah.
while I'm talking. I talk slow enough that it'll play well.
I'm curious if you can take us on, a mini journey as to how you got here.
Where is here, like, specifically, like work wise,
Work
personhood
wise,
wise?
I think all of the things, but really, like, how did you find this work? How did you find energy healing? And maybe to start with, why don't we start with your sun, moon, rising?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Aquarius sun, Pisces rising, Libra moon.
Mm.
And I feel like I'm really equally all those things. Maybe the least is Aquarius, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I started. Born into that. So so I already forgot the question. Tell me again, how did you word it?
Yeah. How did you come to where you are today?
So, okay. How did I come here? So I will say that I already said 15 was when it was a very hard. I grew up with a narcissistic mother. It was a very tough upbringing, and 15 was like the time when I made it. I realized that I don't want to, like, maybe we need a trigger warning here. I'm not sure about suicide, but I was feeling suicidal, and that then I realized, like, I'm staying here. And so I decided, okay, since I'm staying here, I'm going to do whatever I can to be happy, or at that point it was to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
I should also mention that I do have my Mars in Aries, and I feel like that has been a strong component in my life, like a motivating kind of thing.
Yeah, like a driving force.
Yeah, like that Kelly Clarkson thing you alluded to, or you said. So at that point, and I grew up in Palo Alto, which at that point was not Googleville. It was more of a regular suburban town, but it was it's near San Francisco. So I feel like that, and I didn't grow up there. I moved there when I was 11, I should say. But um, so I feel like the influence of San Francisco is pretty strong in the, like, I guess the new agey factor of it. So
Hmm.
like I went to my first psychic when I was 15. It was all around. Like I remember one of my friends in their apartment building, there was a palm reader there. And it was actually before, while I was still feeling suicidal. And she looked at my hand and she was like, "You can change your course. You don't have to make this decision." I hadn't even told her anything. And
Wow.
she just looked at and she really scared my friends, actually. And I was like, "No, no, no, I'm not. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Like, she's wrong. I don't know what she's talking about." But she really saw it in there. She was like, "You don't have to go down this path." So it was
Mm.
like full, that was, there was a lot of like crystal store. I know now people are like, crystals weren't popular until 2010 or something. I'm like, I grew up around, like I got my first crystal in 1988. Like it was all around me. So there was support for that kind of thing. And when I first started, decided that I'm going to be here and I'm going to commit to being here, I read Living with Joy by Sanaya Roman, which is still my favorite
Mm.
book. She channels this spirit Orin, and it was really all about like teaching you how to live in the world energetically speaking. So and then like the next book is called Personal Power Through Awareness, which is all about energy and like owning your power and stuff like that. So then I did help myself a lot and I was feeling a lot better. Just I wasn't doing energy healing, but I was reading all these kind of books. I was getting readings, that kind of thing. No tarot though. Tarot was not ever in my life until actually recently.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And then at 21, I had another kind of bad period um, where I was feeling depressed and I was in a very bad relationship that was really with with a narcissist. I actually was lucky enough. My first two boyfriends were very supportive and loving, but then this third one was a narcissist and um, it was really draining my power, allowing myself to be with him. It was very codependent. And that's when I went to therapy actually for the first time. Um, and it was good. Like that person helped me to see that my mom was a narcissist, started to help me see that dynamic.
Mm.
Um, which was really helpful. And then I found this inner child healing therapist. So that was, which is the work I do now. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I do inner child healing.
Yeah.
Um, and um, so that was helpful for a little while. And I did help myself get out of that slump. I was working really hard to get out of that relationship the whole time I was in it. And I did. And then I moved to, and then I had been getting readings from people who were doing the work that I do now.
Yeah.
Um, so just like kind of off and on. So then I moved to New York and I was like, I want to know how to do those kind of readings because I feel like it would really help me.
So
And
these were energy reading healings, right? Or like
yeah,
energy reading sessions.
that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I only had gotten like a couple of them, but my whole life I was like, I wish I could do that. Cause when I was 15 and I went to that lady, not the palm reader, but the just regular kind of psychic lady, she read energy too, but not the kind I do. But
Mhm.
I was like, oh, I wish I could do that if I could do. And it was kind of actually motivated with like boy craziness and also just boy like wanting to know what they're thinking and stuff like that. It was not motivated from like some powerful place. Um but it really was like and actually I can't remember when I decided to when I was like I want to learn how to do this, it was because um maybe this is my Libra moon, but everything seems to be like motivated through relationship in some way. Not everything, but like this energy, anyway, a lot of stuff for me is motivated by relationship. But I had a good relationship, but then I was in another bad one later, and I was like, oh, actually what happened was my friend was like kind of stumbled into realizing that she could read people's energy. She was very psychic, really. No boundaries, by the way, no boundaries whatsoever. But just like I was dating this guy and I was like, oh, I want it. Like, it was not good. It was very up and down, mercurial. Like, I never, it was just an unhealthy, toxic relationship. I was just very codependent, wanting to know what was going on with him. He was off and on, and my friend suddenly realized that she could tell what he was. I know this sounds kind of like, I don't know, out there, but she read his energy. Like, she was like, this is what he's thinking right now.
Wow.
And then I would find out, I would talk to him, and that's what she was right every time. But she was doing this technique where she would imagine, this is what she told me, and she taught herself, she would imagine flipping his face over energetically and like putting it on herself. And then feeling into the energy and knowing, but she was right.
Yeah, right.
Okay, this is very bad technique, by the way. I'm not recommending this to anybody. It's like the opposite of what I learned and teach. This was 20 years ago. Okay. So I was like, I have to know how to do this. Because she really was always right. Like, she would say things that he would then later say to me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was extremely accurate. So I was like, I need to learn how to do this. So I called the school, and I was like, and this was pre-online classes. This was early aughts. And I was like, how can I learn this? And they were like, well, we have a teacher that's living in New York. I was in New York, and she can teach you. So long story short, this woman, Laura, who's now like, we give each other trades every week. She was my teacher for 2 years. She would come to my apartment and teach me and my friend that did the boundaryless readings. Yeah, the face thing, face off readings. How to do this. And of course, I immediately learned that, like, how important energy boundaries are, how important it is to call your energy back to you. I mean, I remember in the beginning learning the separation technique and just sitting in a movie theater, just watching a movie, but separating my energy constantly from that person. And like, that was way healthier and better for me and more empowering than trying to figure out what he was thinking.
Right.
Not that I don't understand that desire, because people want that from me too sometimes, where they're like, what's going on there? Which it is sometimes, it's interesting and can be helpful. But the way I was doing it, where it was like, I wanted to know the up to minute details, because the problem really is that he was that I didn't have those boundaries. And also he was withdrawn, and like, it was real avoidant attachment situation going on.
Yeah.
But anyway, maybe this wasn't the story you wanted, but here we are. And
this is great. You're doing great.
So this is how I learned how to do it. It was like 2 years. I think it was 2 years, maybe more, like 2.5 years of learning it. And by the way, the whole time I was actually a writer I was writing for TV. Like, that was my job, was writing. I was not doing energy work, but it was becoming less and less satisfying to me. And eventually I was like, after years of doing it just with my teacher trading, and then occasionally I would offer it to friends if they wanted it. I find like I think I started in 2018. Like, I was like, okay, I think I just want to do this professionally, like stop with writing for Hollywood and start, because now I do still write, but I'm writing about inner child healing and stuff. But when I started to do the readings, immediately I saw the inner child in every session. Also, I should say I did go to school for psychology, so I do have that background as well.
Mm.
And I read a ton constantly about psychology and energy healing in general. But that was the big thing, was that I always saw the inner child in every reading, pretty much. Like 9.5 out of 10 readings, the inner child shows up, because it's the unprocessed trauma which is behind every question, really. I mean, like when I was looking at that, wanting to know about that guy that I was in that relationship with, why was that? Well, because underneath that was a little kid version of me that didn't get validate, that felt like that did have to fight for approval and know what my mom was anxious, was avoidant. So it was acting out that whole patterning.
Yeah.
And by healing that, then it's, of course, then it heals that relationship, and I didn't want to be with that person anymore.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I love that. And I feel like that kind of speaks to, I love how you already answered the question of like why this particular work specifically. And I love how it seems to like come to you naturally rather than you seeking it out.
Which part? What
The inner
naturally?
child healing part.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like because you specifically, I mean, you work with energy, but you specifically work with inner child healing in your energy work. Would you say that that's accurate?
I do specifically. Well, I work with whatever comes. Well, okay. I'll say in a session, I work with whatever comes up, and usually that's what comes up.
Right.
And then I do specifically, because I teach inner child healing. I teach how to work with your inner child and communicate and all of that stuff. But one-on-one in an energy healing, it's I work with the energy, and first, and then see what needs to come up.
Yeah.
What needs to be healed.
Mm-hmm. So a couple things really stood out to me when I was preparing for this conversation, and when I was kind of looking through your website, your Instagram, and as you know, I listen to your podcast. And I'd love to just reflect on this a little bit with you, and also maybe like go behind the scenes a little.
Okay.
The first thing I noticed was that, obviously it's very clear to me that you are a writer because you're so good at communicating. And there was such a clarity. And I feel like maybe I've mentioned this to you before, but when I was reading the landing page for your sessions, it was just, it's incredible. Like, I feel like it's so accurate to what you do. I mean, retrospectively, right?
Yeah.
And also, I imagine it really helps a lot of people, because I'm sure people have a lot of questions, about, and also with energy work and the nature of energy work in general, seems like it can go in so many different directions.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that term energy work and energy healing, in some ways it's the bane of my existence, because like it's so broad, and it doesn't mean, it can mean anything, or a lot of things, I should say. Like most people think of Reiki when they hear energy healing. And it is so broad. So I'm glad you feel that way, because I do have to be. Well, the number one thing is also, I don't want to call myself a psychic, because that has its own connotations that I don't like. Specifically telling the future, which sometimes I read into, like for my podcast, I read into the week ahead energetically, speak like what I'm feeling into as far as what that energy holds. But like, I feel like specifics, I'm sure there's some people, I don't know. I just don't think the future, as they say in that Hills theme song, the future is unwritten. Did you ever watch The Hills?
No.
You know that Natasha Bedingfield song? The future is unwritten. You don't know that song?
I don't know that song.
Oh,
I'll have to check it out.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's how I feel about it. I just feel like sometimes there's like a very strong, like everything is heading in a certain direction, where it's like, okay, this is very likely that this is going to happen. Um, like for instance, my husband's father, a couple of years ago, he passed away, and it was like a week before his death, and they thought he was improving, and my husband was trying to decide whether or not he should go. And I felt into the energy, and I was like, oh, you need to go. And he did end up dying that week. Because I feel like sometimes, like, he was ready, like on an energy level, he was ready to go. All the energy was heading in that direction, like just feeling into that kind of thing, I think is possible. But like, as far as like, will I find, my perfect job, like that kind of thing, I feel like, well, that really depends on you and all of the choices that you're going to be making. That's not written out yet. Like I think we have a lot of autonomy over our future.
As you're speaking, it reminds me too of like how that kind of question can really take us out of the real work that is available to us in the moment,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And takes us out of our power. It's like giving our power away to some few. Like, what if I was like, no, you're not going to? And it's like, okay. And then what? But if it's like, well, where are you right now? What's coming up for you right now? What are the triggers? How can you look at that this is all the breadcrumbs to lead you to whatever it is that you're looking at unfold and create, I think. But that was a long way of saying that I don't like the word psychic, but in some ways it does describe what I do, in that I'm looking into the energy in a more of a 3D kind of way.
Yeah.
Like, also, I'm not a therapist, but it is kind of like therapy, but where I'm looking into what's happening and can help people identify what's going on. So I forgot what the original point was, but just energy healing. That's why I try to get really specific on there, because when people go, I don't want anyone to come to me under false pretenses, like thinking I'm going to tell them the future or, so I try to be really, or that I'm like, okay, I don't want anybody. And thankfully, I think I put that out there very clearly, because I haven't had anyone like this, where my fear when I started this was that people were going to be like, okay, prove it to me, like prove to me that you can see whatever. And I'm like, and that's just not interesting to me. Like, if you're not on board, then don't waste your time coming to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or my time. Don't waste our time.
Yeah. I also love how, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm glad you thought it was clear. Do you think that my Mercury in Capricorn is part of that?
Probably. I do feel like there's something very meticulous about how you write. And I really feel this in Instagram too. Like there's kind of it's funny because I really kind of see that Mercury in Capricorn, right? With like being very deliberate about your writing and your messaging. And you're also playful, which to me feels very Aquarian, like there's kind of like a funny energy,
Yeah.
But it's also very kind, which is very Piscean, right? With your Pisces rising. So I feel all of that kind of playing, swirling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my background is comedy. When I was writing I was doing improv in New York. And so that's my background. And I try to allow myself to be all the parts of myself. That's kind of what I was talking about before too, is in the beginning, I felt like I had to compartmentalize, or like, I can't be funny or whatever. I mean, funny is subjective, but like, I just mean like, I can't be myself, which is my version of comedy, and also be spiritual, like I have to be like a serious spiritual. If I'm delivering messages, they have to be serious. But more and more I'm like, oh no, I need to be who I am, which is, I think, again, is what my humor, having my humor come out.
Yeah. The second thing I was going to reflect to you was how prolific you are. I feel like on top of creating all the content you create on Instagram, you do a weekly podcast, you do your sessions. Currently, you're writing your book, right? And then not to
Yeah.
mention all the non-public things that you're doing, like having, a million cats, right? So, so I'm curious to
Mhm.
hear.
And children, regular children,
And children,
human
right?
children.
Right. Do you feel like that maybe philosophy of just bringing your whole self to the table helps you in letting go of perfectionism?
Mm. Well, this philosophy is, well, it's not, I don't know if it's new, but I've only recently been allowing myself to be all of the things, and I'm not fully there yet either. But it's funny you say that about the perfectionism, because so I think it was now, I don't remember time anymore. I think it was 2 years ago. My husband and I started this little kind of side business of making earrings. I just realized that I'm wearing them. They're
Oh, they're
like,
pretty.
yeah, they're feather like earrings made from inner tube tire from bicycle tires.
Wow.
And so because he had made me a pair for Christmas, and everybody commented on them when I would go outside, like in the world. This was pre-pandemic. It feels like a funny way to put that. And when I would go outside, no, when I would be out in the world, literally I would get comments on them every single time. And I was like, we've got to sell these. We've got to make these, because people are always asking me where they are. And my husband is much more like, um, he has a harder time with perfectionism. And
Mm.
he told me actually yesterday, he was like, we never would have done that business if it was not for you just being like, we just got to do this, like put it out there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if to me, it feels like the Aries push, and also I feel like I don't have time for perfection. I'm just like, whatever. I mean, it really does feel like this would not be happening. It's actually kind of a fault. It's like impatience.
Mm.
It's like, I just have this thing and I want to put it out there. And I actually have to learn to wait and be patient. I have the opposite problem.
Interesting. Interesting. So you were
Yeah.
always like very generative and you were always just kind of making stuff, it sounds like.
I mean, I'm thinking when I was like a kid, I would write all the time. Um, and yeah, I guess I was just always, I don't think of myself that way though, isn't it? I mean, so
It's
it's
so
funny that
interesting.
you're saying that, because I
Mm.
don't, like, if you were like, do you put out a lot of stuff? I'd be like, no, I don't. Like, I mean, because I implement my husband a lot, like the podcast, he edits it, and I couldn't, that's where I get tied up. Like um, if there's too many details, I just shut down. That's the ADHD part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if it's simple, I can, it makes me sound like I'm dumb, but if it's like, I know the path to do it, then I can, and if I see it, then I do it. But if
Mm.
I don't, then I don't know that I would have a podcast if it weren't for him, because I get
See.
really tripped up with the technical stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like that. A lot of people
Oh,
get
yeah.
tripped up over the technicalities of doing something. Like, for example, for me, recording this podcast, I release my music, right? But that's a different distribution channel than releasing a podcast. And I do
Mm.
feel like the energy of that kind of weighing me down a little bit. But I
Yeah.
know that all I have to do is do it once, and then I know I can just
Uh,
continue with that same path, right? Yeah.
I'm not like that, because like he will show me many times how to do something. And I tune out. Like I'm just like, I can't, I think it really is something about ADHD and the details of it.
Mm.
I just can't, yeah, it feels very challenging to me. Like if I was good at that or felt like I could do that, I would have another podcast, definitely. Maybe more than that. I already
Wow.
have another podcast idea that I'm thinking, I'm letting it percolate. But
Simmer.
yeah, but but if I did know how to, and like music, like I write music, and
Hmm.
if I knew how to record it, I definitely would have put out a bunch of stuff by
Wow.
now.
Yeah.
But I just, yeah. So that's something I don't know if I'm supposed to get over. Maybe that's the universe being like, you're doing enough. Here's your obstacle. Stop it.
You know, it's interesting because as you're speaking, it makes me think about how certain types of people, or maybe personality structure, gravitate more towards kind of the detail work of like getting things just right. And then certain
Yeah.
other types are just like, I just want to express, I just want to create,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Yeah.
almost like finding a little bit of the middle ground somewhere in
Yeah.
there. I don't know
Yeah.
what's in there, but it's just completely an uncooked thought, but came
Yeah.
to me as you were speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be nice to have a little balance. It does feel to me like especially when I was younger, I was like Virgos would intimidate me a lot. Like I feel like Virgos don't like me, or I used to feel that way. I feel that less. Suddenly I do have a lot of Virgos in my life, including you. I'll count you because you're Virgo rising.
Yeah.
Um and I count that rising and even moon part because I'm just like so I mean, I have a lot of air and it's just like it's almost like I mean, I think I was really judged for it's the shadow part, right? So the shadow of Virgos, maybe some Virgos reject their airy.
Airy side.
Yeah, like letting go of all of the the judgment. Although
Yeah.
Gemini has a lot of well, I think Gemini can be very difficult with it's like for themselves to get things done too, like the overthinking.
Mm. Yeah, I agree because I feel like, I mean, I'm a Gemini moon. I feel like there's a lot of ideas floating around, and it's almost like sometimes as I get older too, I realize that I need a collaborator or I need another
Mhm.
person to kind of help me funnel it
Yes.
down into, earthly
Yes.
form. Yeah.
Yes. I used to feel like I needed a collaborator to do anything. It was like I can't do things without a collaborator. I just really wanted that. But I think for me, my and this is probably separate than what we were talking about, a different thing than what we were talking about in terms of the non-perfectionism. I think this comes back to this belief that I'm starting to embody that I am capable. And so I'm starting to feel like, oh, no, I don't need a collaborator. I can do the whatever it is on my own. But again, there's a balance. So I really love being able to ask my husband to help me with editing and he's happy to do it.
So, what I wanted to ask you was how did Magic Monday come about, actually?
Oh yeah. So I met Tess, who's my co-host, and we both lived in LA. And she was my feng shui person. I hired her to do feng shui for my house. I actually saw her on a TV show, Flipping Out. Do you know that it's on
Uh
Bravo?
huh.
Flipping Out. She was on that,
Yeah.
and I was like, "That's so cool!" And she seems really cool. I'm gonna ask her to come feng shui our house. And we lived in this like tiny little condo and had two kids and like we were all on top of each other, so I thought it might help,
Yeah.
and then we just became friends. And then we both left Los Angeles actually the same year to move to different states in the mountains, different mountains. And um then I just asked her if she wanted to do it.
That's awesome. I love that
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
She is a Virgo though, because it's funny because at first, and this is my thing, like for a long time, I was always like, collaborate, collaborate. Like, maybe that's my Aquarius, but I like even like as a writer, I was always like, who can I collaborate with? Who can I and I asked her at first, and she's like, what would it be about? Like, what would we do? And, very Virgo, or maybe it's just a regular question. but, but I was like, well, I don't know. I do energy healing. You do what you do. So we could just do it. And she's like, yeah, she was like, no, not right now, not until we know what we're really doing. So
Very
actually,
Virgo
then,
answer.
yeah, exactly. And she's a Capricorn rising.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So double happening there. And then I just figured out the idea. I was like, well, I just basically said the format that we do now, which is like check in. I'll do an energy report. You do a practical magic segment, and then maybe we can do a card reading at the end. And then she was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So that's how it happened.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. So I kind of want to pivot a little bit into energy healing. I feel like you've kind of talked a little bit about how you would define it, but the first thing that I was curious about is whether you've ever encountered a situation where energy healing session or energy healing techniques are not appropriate for a person or like not helpful for a person. Have you ever come across a situation like that?
I mean, when somebody has come to me for a healing, I haven't. I could see, like the only time I would see it not being appropriate would be if somebody wasn't open to it. That's really the only thing that ever and all the time now that I've done this, I can literally think of the 2 times when it was like where I ended a session early. One time I ended a session early. I think it was both times. Yeah. And the other one, maybe I didn't, but we may as well have because they were just not open to hearing anything. And like I said, I'm not about trying to because of the kind of energy healing I do is very boundaried. So I can't see anything if on a being soul level people don't want me to. If they're like, no, I don't want to look at that, whether it's they don't want to look at it themselves or they don't want me to see, I don't go digging. I'm not doing a face-off situation. Same with when we're looking at people that they're asking about. I don't go digging into them. But if it's just like in regular therapy, like if you're not open to looking at your thing, your stuff, then then that's where you are. And so you're not going to grow past it at that time until you are ready. Yeah. Like nobody's going to change unless they want to change. And the one time somebody just like didn't want to hear what I was saying, basically, they really were very committed to their victim status. And I'm pretty gentle in my readings, I'm not like, I'm not tough love whatsoever. I'm anti-tough love actually, but I'm still telling the truth. And they were pretty committed. So it was like, okay, I feel like we're done here. Then the other time, this is actually, I think I've since put this on my website, that if you feel like you've tried everything and this is your last resort, I'm not the answer. Because like, I'm not like a magic pill, and this person literally said like, well, I've done everything. So let's see what you see. And you could tell very quickly that they were slow, like realizing that, oh, this isn't going to save me either, And so they were, which is sad, but, and I have a lot of empathy for them, but also it was kind of like, well, I can't help you if you are looking at anything that way, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So that's
Absolutely.
the only time I would just say work in general. Yeah, but specifically energy healing wasn't appropriate. Can you think of a time when it wouldn't be appropriate?
Personally, I mean, the reason why I asked that was I couldn't really think of anything. But, in my work as an astrologer, I've definitely had a couple sessions where I'm like, maybe this person needs
Oh.
energy healing actually, because
Oh.
sometimes with astrology, the language can really get in the way. It,
Uh-huh.
and I think, I mean, I'm just going to be very honest here. Like some of it has to do with like where I am in my development at that
Mhm.
time of reading the person, as well as a little bit of my ego around um, if someone is paying for an astrology reading, then I have to give them an astrology reading.
Mm.
When there's so many
Yeah.
ways to do astrology, right? Like for me, I can kind of just tell you what I see without the jargon too,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and kind of tuning into that. And but I agree with you. I think, someone who is very attached to a particular narrative and doesn't
Yeah.
want to see maybe a different point of view or kind of a wider lens on
Well,
reality.
yeah, I think actually thinking back on it, both those cases, they wanted to be say there was an idea that there was something that could just be the magic bullet.
Mm,
And not even that they like one of the people I'm thinking about, it's not even that they hadn't done work, they had done work on themselves. And I do have a lot of compassion for this person. Um even but they because I have been there where it's like, well, I've done all this stuff and still nothing's changing is what it feels like.
yeah.
But I think a lot of times when we're in that mindset, we aren't able to see how much has changed. We're so in our myopic view of things that we aren't being very generous with ourselves
Oh
about
wow.
how much has changed.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah. I had never really
Yeah.
thought of it that way, but you're right. It's almost like that energy of I've tried everything but nothing has worked is attached to a particular outcome of how something's supposed to look when it worked, right?
Yeah. And also that to me, I feel like what's underneath that too is um there's something wrong with me. There's a lot of self-judgment, even though I think they may think at those time or someone may they're blaming the world, like, well, nothing's working. It's just how it is. But really, I think what I feel is that they're blaming themselves. Like, if
Hmm.
I was different or if I knew how to do something better, then I wouldn't be like this. It's a
Yeah.
very sad way of looking. It's very invalidating. But anyway, that process itself, like that mode of thinking, I think is actually the thing keeping people stuck when we get like that, you
Yeah.
know, because it's not being generous with ourselves. So then it's keeping us stuck in this very limited view. And I think you are right. There is an element too of like maybe the outcome is different than where you're attached to.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel like maybe as, from your perspective as a reader, right? It's not always easy to gauge whether that session was helpful for the person or not, because sometimes, I mean, most of the time, I feel like with energy, things change pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But there are times when maybe, you know, a week after they had a session with you,
Yeah.
then they really felt the change?
Definitely. Then suddenly they're getting aha moments or whatever. I mean, sometimes maybe it doesn't like help, but for me, I think I mean, like as a recovering codependent, this was hard for me at first, but I have to really remember that my only job is to see what I see and say what I see. And I
Hmm.
can't be attached to whatever it is the client does with it, the person does with it.
Totally.
I mean, of course I want though everybody to be like feel a million times better, to have realizations, and I definitely want that. And so yeah, it can be but it can be hard if I feel like, oh, I don't know if they felt anything.
Yeah.
But there have been many, I wonder if you felt that way too. Like, and there's been many times where I'm like, well, I don't know if they felt that was beneficial, and then I'll hear back from, then they'll come back. I'll be like, oh, okay, I guess it was.
Yeah, quite a bit, quite a bit. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it has to do with my expectations around how being helpful looks like, and kind of seeing that. But I think that has to do with experience too. Like the more
Yeah.
experience you have under your belt, the less you feel that. And I think it's just kind of part of not attaching yourself to like a particular session.
Yeah, exactly. Not taking it personally.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So one thing, I attended I signed up for your Energy Healing 101 class, and there was something you mentioned there that I just thought was just so spot on. And I'm really glad you brought it up because I've never really heard anyone talk about this. And this is something that floats around in my mind quite a bit as a person who is, I guess, kind of identified with being an artist, which is that you mentioned something about the idea that our imagination, or maybe our imaginative faculty, plays a role in our work with energy. And I think you made the distinction between like the kind of imaginative faculty we use when we're daydreaming versus when we're actually like intuitively seeing into a person or a situation, or even our own body, like on an energetic level. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about that. Like, what is your sense about the quote unquote imagination and its role in energy work?
Yeah. So, it's funny because that first, like I forget, my husband actually worded it in a certain way where that started me thinking about it that way. Cause I forget how he put it exactly, but basically like, um, we're used to, oh boy, I'm not gonna be able to say this how he said it, but it's something like we dismiss, um, we dismiss the language of energy healing as imagination, or like we dismiss something like that. He didn't put it like that, but we dismiss like getting intuitive hits and stuff like that, or like feeling into the energy of someone. It's easy to dismiss it as just our imagination. And or it looks a lot, but so the thing is, it does look a lot like that. It's very and every time I think about this, I'm like, oh, this sounds so I mean, sounds unscientific, but I actually approach energy healing in a pretty scientific way, which is like I test theories if they work, if they're true, seem to be true, then I accept them, and if they don't, I throw it out.
Right.
But it is easy to dismiss it. So okay, it's kind of hard to talk about, like, to put into words, but I'm going to do my best because this is a podcast. So, like when I am doing an energy session and I'm starting to see a past life, let's say. I hope I'm answering this question correctly, but we'll go and you can ask questions if you like, if I'm way off. When I started to notice when I would see past lives was this feels exactly like when I'm daydreaming and I'm just imagining things. It's like it felt like the same feeling and like the same path, but talk about experience. So over time, I decided to follow it, right? So I would see a past life and I'd be like, okay, this is what I'm kind of feeling into, and just basically imagining is, and I would describe it. And it has never not been apropos to what is going on in the client's life, or like it's like exactly the same thing that's happening, or it's, it's just like it feels very vibrant. So it has proven to be true. And that's just one kind of the most extreme example. But if I'm just looking at people's energy fields, it would be like, if you would ask me, how do you know that they are, I don't know, that their dad used to yell at them a lot or something. Like, how do you know that? I can't prove that. I don't know. It feels like the same thing as imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is that I would say that I feel more grounded because, before I do a session, I ground. I am very clear about where my boundaries are, my energy. It's more like maybe a lucid dream or something. Like, I know I'm very aware of where I am, and it does just feel like the same thing. And the past life thing example is the most extreme because it's really like one foot in front of the other. It feels less like I'm going into the past.
Yeah.
So I just have to go one. I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to describe what I'm seeing, but I don't see the whole picture at all out there, laid out there. It's like I have to say one thing and then I see the next thing. Then I see one thing and then I see the next part. It's like a picture that starts to reveal itself the more I go into it.
I resonate with that too. Like with my work in energy work, I feel like in general information is not always revealed in its whole to us, and it's kind of like about following that breadcrumb.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I feel like, what's interesting about imagination is that it's so dismissed in our in the dominant Western culture that is rooted in like scientificism. I don't know if that's even a word, but in like the scientific method, or what people think the scientific method is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many different ways, maybe there are different anatomy to our imaginative faculty that are yet unexplored. Because it's interesting, you brought up like the astral body. I feel like that's a slightly different version of my quote unquote imagination than what I'm tapping into when I'm like, let's say, trying to create a music video, right? Versus what I'm tapping into when I'm actually tuning into a person or a chart.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too. I know what you're saying. I wonder if it's because it's about somebody else. Like it feels different because you're looking at somebody else as opposed to your own expansive creativity. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's like going in a different, I can just see it in a different, like, energetic space. But it may be all part of the same thing. I don't know. I mean, Einstein, he said that quote about imagination. Do you know what it is? Something about how important it is. Do you know that quote? Oh, you don't. It's like, I mean, he really valued imagination.
Yeah.
And obviously he's like, but I think that most people who, I mean, our world is very attached to what it can see with its eyes and prove with, that's why I really don't like this whole thing around psychics and like, they're amazing because they told me something about myself that they told me about like my whatever dead and that no one else knew. I mean, that's super cool. But what I don't like about that is like, it's only cool because it's something I can point to and prove, as opposed to even just like, I don't like a feeling like this all feels right. This all resonates. This all like I'm feeling better. I can't necessarily express, I mean, not that one's better than the other, but just that
Mhm.
it is very valid. Your feelings are valid as something that you can say, oh, this exists because I can see it with my eyes. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so I do think the more that is affirmed in our society, really the healthier we're going to be.
Mhm.
And we have
I
more
agree.
tools at our disposal because of that.
Yeah.
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 So the energy work that you do, you apply that to the astrology reading?
That's a great question. I feel like my relationship with it is still evolving, and it's
Okay.
still something that I'm trying to figure out how to kind of tune into. But I really feel that during sessions, I usually, look at the chart beforehand, right, and see if there's anything major that I need to know. But when I really dive into the session itself and the person is in front of me, a lot of it is about tuning into like really what this person is needing right now.
Mm,
Because
that's
even,
great.
yeah, even talking about archetypes, right? I feel like it's truly an activation in someone's soul or psyche. And
Yeah.
you kind of have to open the right door at the right time
Mm,
and really
you
feel
mean
into like what they're needing. Because sometimes, it's, and then I want to, get back to your question, but I feel like we can use archetypal language in many different ways, right? One of them is to kind of help mirror our experience, and another one is to maybe open another portal that we're not aware of, or like a
mm,
side of our personality that we can tap into in order to problem solve or to get us out of
mhm,
certain situations. And I think tuning into the energy of like how it feels if I introduce a particular archetype or if I go down this route versus this route is really helpful in an astrology reading because um, ultimately, I think you want to kind of help people develop a relationship with their own chart.
yeah, that's interesting. It is similar to what I was saying about, it feels like it anyway, like about how somebody, like meeting them where they are, and if somebody isn't in the place where they're open, then they're not going to see it. But like you're talking about, maybe, I don't know, this may be too esoteric, but like seeing a portal for them, like, oh, look at this portal. Like maybe you
Mhm.
can get there this way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
Mhm. So, the last big topic I kind of want to talk to you about is this idea of spiritual bypassing.
Mm,
Because I think it's really interesting that these days we seem to be very allergic to certain words. Like, for example, like the idea of like love and light, and I understand where our aversion comes from because maybe it's been used by certain people in a certain way. But I kind of fall somewhere in the spectrum of like being cautious about the words that I use, but also being aware that just because some people misuse or abuse certain words doesn't mean that the concept itself isn't valuable, right?
yeah.
Isn't important. And so I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts. And this can be totally kind of emergent thoughts about how you think about or how you experience concepts like love, like light, and like spiritual bypassing.
So are you asking, I just want to be clear, like just basically how do I feel about the idea of spiritual bypassing and like still using like concepts or related to that?
For example, I think, this idea of light, right?
Mhm.
Which I think we is so helpful. like thinking about energy as light or different
Yeah.
colors,
Yeah.
is so helpful in that work. And also I can see how um, people can use that as like light is good, dark is bad, or something like that,
Oh,
like
I see.
when we get thrown into our binary thinking, like that either
Mm-hmm.
or thinking,
Yes.
when I feel like, especially when you talk about light in your work,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's not like that.
Yeah.
Does that
Well,
help?
light. Yeah, I think so. You'll tell me if I answer it the way that you meant it, but I mean, or if I'm addressing it the way you meant it. But well, light for me is like a very, I mean, in some ways, it's just like it's another tool, it's
Mm,
not, I mean, I think it's great because I like the tool, but it's not loaded. Just the word light is not loaded to me. I mean, I work, to me, light is like my main tool of working because
yeah.
it helps to flush out energy that is ready to leave, and it also fills you up with your highest information. So that's been my experience with it. It's just really helpful. But I know that there have been, like, I don't know, people who call themselves what is it? What light, what is it? There's like a term that
Light
got
workers.
light workers. Thank you. Yeah. So apparently a bunch of like QAnon people started using that or something, or like it's a way to identify them. And that was disappointing to me to hear that because like I do consider myself a light worker, and I don't like that term got kind of
Co-opted.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um it's because I do resonate with light. Now, that just because I love light doesn't mean that I don't work with shadow too. I mean, I'm all about embracing all the feelings. I mean, that's really maybe one of the cornerstones of my work is that all the feelings, all the stuff, like I go towards any kind of shame I have. Like if I notice shame is coming up, I go towards it. I try to love it as much as I can. That's where I feel it's all in the inner child, and I try to, love my inner child for all their feelings. And um so in that sense, yeah, I feel like they're all valid. But I think the old school way of manifesting was all about spiritual bypassing. That
Mm,
old school way of manifesting was about like, if you notice a feeling that is quote unquote low vibration. Well, first of all, there were low vibration feelings. There's even like some chart or something that someone proved that, like, what was it, like something like guilt was like you're vibrating at a certain level, and like and
mm,
the highest vibration was love, maybe. um which, who knows, maybe that's true, but it does, but when you put it like that, it's like, oh, therefore I have to banish the guilt. But
yeah.
instead of really honoring the guilt, and like, I think that when this is my feeling, and when we leave our bodies, we are not going to have this binary experience in any way. We're going to be just, I think that we return to being love, and um it's much less binary. So like, the as much as we can enjoy, I know it's hard to imagine enjoying it, but like, it really is possible and helpful, I think, um to really welcome all of it. So, I was just saying, like,
Mm,
in the old school way of manifesting, you really had to be like, okay, I'm not vibrating at that level. I'm vibrating. So I have to like immediately switch. What's the feeling I want to feel? And then switch into that.
yeah.
And I really think it's helpful to know what feelings you want to feel and feel into those, but not at the expense of rejecting any part of you, because that's it's just going to come back to, you know, shoot
Bite
you in
you.
the foot. What? Yeah,
Bite you, I said.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's not, you can't, it just doesn't work that way. I heard this really great story I think I talked about it on the podcast, but I forget who it was. I think Tosha Silver posted about it, where Melody Beatty, who wrote Codependent No More, started she was really unhappy in her house, and she learned from someone. She started to thank all of the stuff that was happening, even if she hated it, and she didn't even have to believe it that she was thankful for it, which I also like, because that's kind of turning spiritual bypassing on its head. So she was like, thank you for this ugly house, thank you for my moldy rug, and things changed. And I started to practice that, like, thank you for this tough lesson, thank you for my resentment or whatever it was. And I could like feel in my heart chakra like a crackling, like, like when a fire's crackling, like I could
Mhm.
feel my heart chakra just like opening up, just for saying thank you and not forcing myself to feel like, okay, I'm grateful. Like, let me move into this space where that's totally inauthentic, but just really like, okay, thank you. But something about even saying that was welcoming the dark whatever into the
Mhm.
welcoming the shadow stuff into the light.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we really do need all of it. It's just hard, we as humans, it's hard to, I mean, you can build a tolerance for it. I certainly have built up my tolerance for feelings like shame and whatever it is, jealousy, things that I would push aside. I shouldn't be jealous. I shouldn't be. And instead, like, okay, thank you for my jealousy, and just going towards it with some kind of compassion
Mhm.
helps to integrate all of it.
Yeah. I love that. Thank
Did
you.
I did that answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, good.
Absolutely. I think the issue is maybe the superimposition of our moral judgment
Mm,
onto that, because I
yeah,
do think that energy to me does seem to vibrate at different levels, right?
yeah,
But that it's very
that's true.
neutral, you know? It's
Yes.
like music. It's like there are high notes, there are low notes, and there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with the low notes or the high notes. And it's interesting because I had a conversation with another fellow musician friend who's also a spiritual coach now, and
Mm.
we were talking about how, you know, when you look at, for example, opera singers, like most famous opera singers are either sopranos or tenors, right? Which are the higher
Ah,
voices.
interesting. Not the
Yeah,
middle.
not the middle, because I think we as humans are naturally maybe attracted to, shiny, quick
Mm.
objects.
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and yeah, absolutely, like that high frequency does have a certain um attraction to them, and yet I think when we use our judgment towards it, like good or bad, or our morality standards, then it becomes
Right.
really weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Cause I think maybe that's what I was saying with like maybe it does vibrate at that level, like doubt or whatever, or guilt. But yeah, you're right. The problem becomes when we're like, well, that's terrible. So I need
Hmm.
to. And also just assuming, you know, when I have been in grief, like grieving someone who died or something, I've started practicing opening up to it. And when it's true that when you're neutral about it, when you're just like, here's a feeling that I'm going to feel into, it transforms.
Yeah.
But when you don't resist it, when that helps you to welcome it and let it go through. And but if you're like, oh, I don't want to feel this because this is going to be terrible. But it's like, what if you really let that go and just thought, okay, I'm used to thinking that this feeling is terrible, but what if it wasn't terrible? What if it,
Mm.
just maybe it opens you up or something. I mean, I hate to say this about grief because, I feel like it's a controversial thing to say. Like, it feels like a spiritual bypassy thing to say, to be like, well, enjoy your grief, welcome the grief. But I really have had that experience of like, I'm going to go towards it, and it opened my heart, and I was able to, it's almost like the world became brighter. Like I could
Yeah.
see, I was more present. I could, my heart opened up wider. I could feel more. it did have its benefits.
Absolutely.
It's really the resistance and the shutting down that is, I think, hurts us the most as humans just trying to be in this world.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Natasha, thank you so much for joining me. Any last words or how people can find you?
Last words. I'm going to die after this. No. Yeah, people can find me at highestlighthealing.com and highest light healing on Instagram. And yeah, and my book is coming out, but not till next spring 2023, Inner Child Healing. Oh, also I have been writing for Mind Body Green. And that's like a spiritual site that, and I'll be doing the energy report for them every week starting in January. Oh, well, this is coming out already. So maybe you can go there and read my weekly energy report.
Yay, super exciting. And I really encourage everyone to just get sessions with you whenever you're available and to join your classes because they're just treasure troves.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. That feels nice to hear.
Thank you, Natasha. Well, that's it for my conversation with Natasha. I thank you for being here with me today, and I hope you found something helpful, insightful, and nourishing from our conversation. As always, you can find all the ways to connect with Natasha, to book sessions with her, and to listen to her podcast, Magic Monday, with her co-host, Tess Whitehurst. I just love how the Magic Monday podcast is so easy to listen to. Natasha and Tess really have this sweet conversational way with their podcast, and they're also very candid. So sometimes things happen that are just like, whoa, I did not see that coming. And they have incredible guests. So definitely check that out. And I would also encourage you to really check out Natasha's courses, which have been super helpful to me. If you found this podcast or this conversation inspiring, nourishing, or helpful to you in some ways, I would absolutely love it if you could subscribe, rate, or review this podcast with 5 stars or whatever is the highest ranking on your podcast app. If you think that someone else will benefit from this episode, please share with them too, whether that's on social media, with a friend, or with your community. Until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.